Today we're going to be learning how to transfer a mural to a wall or a canvas using the traditional grid or so-called elemental grid. This powerful tool is about to make a super detailed system of boxes aligned one next to the other, what we're going to use as a map to transfer our design. We're going to start with a Photoshop session. I will show you how I build my grids and how to read it. We're going to make the grid on the wall. We're going to transfer the mural. And at last we're gonna render it while we see the pros and cons of this method. Stay with me if you wanna learn this super powerful tool. This is Cobre from ARTISTHUB.STUDIO. I'm gonna do exactly the same thing that I will do on the wall later. And I know this wall is 270 centimeters tall. And I'm going to need 9 rows. If you divide 270 by 9, will give you 30. So I know that I will have to make a mark every 30 centimeters. 30 centimeters, 1 feet. And I'm going to be measuring the shorter one. That's why I want to measure the vertical so I can work it horizontally. It's less work this way. There is one way you can do it without using any tools of Photoshop, just copying and pasting, and it would be like that. Trace one line. You copy paste that line and then you move it down until you find the place you want. Then you merge those two lines and you will have like one block. This is one object now. And then I will copy paste the same object again. And like that I will have the measurement inside my thing. And now if I make these two lines match, I will have exactly the same proportion. I will merge this object again and I will copy paste it again. Here Photoshop recognize my array, but you can do it by hand. Just measure the thing, copy paste, and then using the measure you have inside, you will have the right proportion. And by the time you copy paste like this object 3-4 times, you're gonna have pretty much all the grid you need. Here I do it one more time, so I have plenty of rows. I'm gonna merge all these objects and I'm gonna have only a cluster of lines. All these lines are one object. And once you place it in the top, you can tweak a little bit until you get exactly the same proportion you need. Now, like that, I have the 9 rows that I'm going to need. And that's my fixed measure. Each one of them are 30 centimeters, 1 foot. Now what I have to do is to find the columns. And for that, I'm gonna copy paste this thing and I'm gonna rotate it 90 degrees. And like that, using the edge of my wall, I'm gonna place the grid. And since it is smaller, I'm gonna copy paste it again until I find the rest of the wall. Now I will have to find the diagonals. If you are doing it in Photoshop, it's super easy because if you grab the brush that you've been using and then you click one corner and you shift click the other one that you need to link, it will do it automatically. It will make a straight line and that's exactly what you need. And like that I have my diagonal and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing that we did before. We copy paste until we find the place it's supposed to be. Photoshop will snap it because it already knows my measure, but you can do it by hand. Merge this group and then I will duplicate this object. And by now you already figured it out. I'm gonna merge this again and I'm gonna duplicate it until I get the full wall. Once I have the full diagonal, I'm gonna merge all of this, I'm gonna duplicate it and I'm gonna rotate it, and like that I have a perfect traditional grid all over my wall. If you don't wanna do the whole thing, what you can do is go to Google, you type grid, go to images, and like that you will have plenty of traditional grids for you, and then you can trace on top of this, or you can use this one and you can use in multiplied fusion mode. Now let's pretend we are there in the wall. I have my wall already buffed and I have my grid on my hand. I'm gonna do exactly the same thing, so it's going to be easier for you to see later. This is my design, right? This is what I have to transfer on my wall. The most difficult part of this process is to find the first box. I know I have 4 in the horizontal row and I have 3 on my column. I will have to go to my wall and try to find the same square, the same box. This is my box. This is the one that everything will start from. I can get a little closer here so I can see better what I'm going to do. Now it's up to me how I'm going to be reading this grid. I know that my eyelid starts right there in the cross of the diagonals. So it would be right here. Then on my left, I know the eyelid is right there in the middle of that structured line. The other one is right under my cross again. And then in this structured line, I can see it is about a quarter, so it'd be here in this quarter. In the other side is right under this cross, and in the half of this diagonal. This one is almost here in the half again in the diagonal, and in the quarter here in this vertical. And now, since I have all these marks, what I have to do is to link them. These are my searching lines. I'm gonna speed up this process because you saw what I was doing, and it's basically doing the same thing all over. Try to find all those marks and then connect them, link them together. It is alright if it is not perfect, because you wouldn't be doing it with a solid color like this. You will be searching those lines, and then you will have to go over and over until you get exactly what you need. This would be basically like a detail layer. You don't need a structure layer here like we did on the freehand method, because we have a lot of information coming from these boxes, from the grid, so we don't have to search that much. Then you're gonna be polishing it with the rendering layer. Okay, now I have my eye in the place it's supposed to be. I will have to find the other eye. How you do it? Counting the boxes. And you can count in the way you want, but for me it is always useful to use the marks that I already have on my wall. So I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I know that my left tear duct will be exactly on the 5th box. And now you will do exactly the same thing all over again. Use that grid to find the marks and then connect those marks until you get exactly what you're looking for. I did a little bit of this grid the previous night because it's time consuming, and you have to imagine you have no grid in here. You just see a solid color, my buff color. But don't worry, I left a little bit on the top so you will see how to do it. I use my primary color, my buff color. It was the middle tone that I'm going to be using for my sketch. Something like that, I'm saving materials. Next step would be to measure your wall. Since it is 270, I'm gonna divide it in 9, which is 9 squares of 30 centimeters each, which is about 3 feet. It is easier for me to measure only this side of the wall instead of measuring the long one. If this was a vertical wall, it would be better to measure my rows, my horizontals. But this one, since it is shorter here than there, it is easier for me to divide this one. Since I know my measure, I'm gonna translate it widely, and I don't really care how it's gonna end up in there. It could be 1/4, 1/2, or maybe a perfect square. It's not important, I only care about the vertical ones. This one is easier for me to measure because it's shorter. Again, you have to pretend you don't see all the squares or the dots. You will see only the buff color. I'm gonna be measuring it, and I'm gonna make a mark every 30 centimeters. You can use a Sharpie, you can use your brush, a spray can, whatever. Just make a mark every 30 centimeters. Then you're gonna trace an horizontal line out of that mark. I have my level here that is very used. This is very old, but it's really cool because it's 1 meter long, it's 3 feet. Pretend you have a mark in here where this dot is, right? So I will place my level in here, and I will pivot it out of this dot until I find the right balance on my bubble, and then I will trace the line. For making the grid, I need a little contrast on my buff wall, otherwise it would be super hard later to color. So what I'm going to do is to use 50% water, 45% of the buff color, and 5% of black color. So I will mix all that very nice, and I will have a little darker color than the one that I have on my wall. And since it is very watery, it's going to be way easier for us to stretch that line on the wall. It will roll super easy, and if you messed up, you can clean it, and you can see those lines like very easy. And once you start working on your rendering, all those lines will disappear because the contrast is not that much. It's pretty much the same hue. Let me show you with a practical example. I have my mark in here. This is my mark. I will place it right there on my right, and then I will make a pivot out of that. Once the level is correct, I will trace that line, that perfect line, using my level as a ruler. Once I'm satisfied with it, I will use the other bubble on my level, and I will place it vertically, doing exactly the same thing, using the previous mark that I done on the top of my wall, and I will pivot my level until I get a perfect vertical line. And then I will do exactly the same thing here next to the other line, And then using the vertical and horizontal line that I have, I will trace a diagonal line using the reference that is already on my wall, and like that I will have all the lines that I need. And like that I have my full grid on the wall. From far away you don't really see it, but if you step closer to the wall, all those marks are there, all those structure lines are there, and they are very powerful because you have a lot of information here that you can grab on to paint your murals. You can see here the hue is pretty much the same. The contrast is very similar from one to the other. Once I paint my searching lines on top of this, you're barely gonna see it. You don't have to get obsessed on covering everything out, because you can use all those lines as a texture pretty much. Now I'm gonna be doing the same process that we did on Photoshop. I'm gonna be counting my boxes. I know that I have 4 in my horizontal, is in my row, and then 3 on my vertical, my column. So I know that in that half of that structure line, I'm gonna have the top of my eyelid. First one is always the hardest to find, and then from that one you will follow that line as it is a map, right? You can see that the color that I'm using is not very high in value. It's pretty much the same value than the buff color, and like that this is going to be working as an under layer. I'm gonna be painting on top of this one. I'm gonna have the opportunity to clean this out later when I'm working on my rendering layer. Right now, these are my searching lines, and it's about to find the design on the wall using the information that I have. And since I have a lot of boxes, a lot of columns and rows, it's going to be highly detailed. I'm not really gonna have to fix anything. It's about finding the right flow on this wall. Okay, let me speed up the process because you already know what we are doing here, and it's basically about to find the eye on the wall. I can go a little harder on these lines because I know these are underlines and these lines ain't definitive. I'm gonna be working on top of this. I will have to clean this later. And like that I'm finding everything on the right side of the face. I mean on the right side of my wall, left side of the face. And once everything is in the place I like, I will go with the other eye. You can see here I'm doing a different process than the one that I showed you in Photoshop. I'm counting again from the side, and like that I will find the corner of my eye and I will build the rest of my eye coming out of this box. First box is a hard one to find, and then you have to follow out of that box. Second eye is always harder if you're going to do it freehand, but since we're doing it with a grid system, it's pretty much the same. Let me find the eyebrow here, and now I'm gonna be working on the nose. That's my nose, there you go. And like that you have a perfect transfer on your wall. If you can see, the proportions are exactly the same, the framing is perfect, everything is in the place it's supposed to be. It's a little time consuming for you to build the grid, but once you are on the go, the piece will pop way easier than doing it freehand or take a grid. And now I'm gonna speed up the process and I'm going to show you how I render this mural. The elemental grid is the most traditional of all. Art has been using this method since the year 1400. Can you believe that? The elemental grid is about a series of squares of the same proportion placed one next to the other. They are built with horizontal, vertical and diagonal lines. All of them separated in a systematic way. They have to be equal, they have to be the same, and that's gonna give us a perfect grid that we're gonna be using as a map to trace the guidelines of our design. Like that the proportions are going to be perfect because we have a lot of information to follow. Very cool stuff. To begin with, we have to measure the wall, we have to define how many squares we're gonna need. The more rows and columns, more definition. More definition, less corrections, but more work on the placement. By now, you may figure out that tracing the grid is a lot of work and it could get a little tedious. If you make too many rows and columns, the design could be hard to find and translate. If you don't make enough, you have the chance of breaking your proportions. Only experience will give you that because it's different to all of us. All of us need different amount of squares. I don't know why. If you want to learn how to make one of these from scratch, if you want to learn how to render a mural like this, go to ARTISTHUB.STUDIO and I'm going to meet you there because I have tons of courses there. I'm going to teach you all about graffiti, murals, anamorphic, photography, stencils. Everything is right there in the website, so go and check it out, you won't regret it. Now we're going to see the pros and cons of this method. Number one, There is like an organic vibe at the final work. You can see the humanly made through the strokes. Art needs a little imperfections, something that a machine will never be able to imitate, because the grid will help us find the proportions, but we still need that artist's interpretation of the shapes, and that really shows the artist behind the piece, and like that is very pleasing for the audience. Number 2, you can solve the piece with relatively low material cost. Number 3 is a very strong resource for the rendering layer, because we can still see the grid through the transparency of the colors, and like that we can define where everything needs to be. Not only the main shapes, but the direction of the wrinkles, the pores, the eyelashes, the glows, the hair, everything will be placed in the right place because we can still see the grid through the layers. Number 4. We don't have a size limitation like with the freehand method or the Tecos grid. We can trace this grid in a 30 stories building or a little canvas. It's exactly the same thing. And number 5, we can achieve a perfect framing and the design is exactly where it needs to be, and we're gonna have perfect proportions and perfect dimensions. And now the cons. Number 1, we need some previous work. We have to take our design already squared and we need tools for that, and that could be annoying. Number 2, it could be tedious at the beginning. It's slow to start with since we have to measure and be super methodic. Everything has to be perfect, otherwise you will have the risk of making a weak mural. And it takes some time until you see something organic on the wall. That's why it doesn't feel very artsy at the beginning. You know, you have to go through it. Number 3, you need to be extra clean, careful and patient. Rushing it up may end up in a bad grid, and with that, a bad mural. Number 4, we need to bring tools with us, like a level and a measuring tape. A laser beam could make it easier, but you still need to bring it, and that's something to think about. Number 5, you need to cover the grid at the end. No trace of under straight lines are acceptable, and no grid can be seen in the final result. Number 6 and final, it takes pretty long time to make. It's time consuming, and that's annoying. Overall, this is a super strong method. It is kind of outdated though. I would recommend it, especially for canvases, because with a drawing table and a speed square, rulers, pensive, it would be much faster than tracing it on the wall. I totally go with a cover grid for a project like this. It would take 10% of the time we use for this one, and I will show you in the next video, but I wanted you to see it because I think it's important for you to understand every method, every possible method. This is a classic way. They've been doing this since the 1400s, and there is a reason for that. It's very strong, it's a lot of information going on. You may be using this grid for some project.
I hope you really like this method and you learned something out of this video. There are 5 more very powerful ways to transfer a mural to a wall or a canvas, depending on the problem you have to solve. And be sure to check out the studio website, which is ARTISTHUB.STUDIO, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really helps. See you in the next wall.